Wonderful. Thank you, David, to put forward that clip of the launch of the Israel Allies Caucus. What was it, a fortnight ago almost now? And welcome to everybody around the country to our SCAFI, Southern Cross Alliance for Israel meeting that happens every month. And we are privileged tonight to have a couple of wonderful, great speakers, and to welcome them. We will do so in just a moment. But it's sort of like the launch of the Israel Allies Foundation and the relaunch of the caucus gives us some, I'll call it grunts, into how we can make influence particularly our politicians in Australia and into their relative electorates with education, with clarification, with speaking, with Jews and Christians standing together. And it's just a wonderful privilege that we've been given to be able to do that. So I just welcome you all tonight. I'm, as chair of the Southern Cross Alliance for Israel and now Israel Allies Foundation. We will give you more details about the foundation, because the foundation is built in order to raise money to do all the things that we as a loose body as SCAFI couldn't do. Although we had 40 Christian and Jewish organisations around us, it was sort of like we didn't have a legal body into doing media reports and speaking and educating people into the truth, inverted commas, as against what's presented in the media. And as part of this whole journey, I have been, just amazed with the relationship that we have built through the Jewish community, and in particular, as the founding rabbi of SCAFI and the founding rabbi of the Israel Allies Foundation, we welcome our founding rabbi, Isaac Reisenberg, to welcome us tonight. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, John, for your kind words and introduction. Many of us who've been to Israel know that Friday, Erev Shabbat, the markets, the shops, the supermarkets of Israel are bustling with shopping for the forthcoming Shabbat. This Erev Shabbos is alive with joy and happiness, warm greetings of Shabbat Shalom in anticipation of the oncoming Shabbat. However, last Friday in Israel, Erev Shabbat, a pale had fallen on the Jewish people as the bodies of Shira Bibas and her redhead little boys, Ariel and baby Kafir, were returned to Israel in black draped coffins. In the aftermath of that horror of October 7th, the image of a terrified mother, Shira Bibas, surrounded by gunmen, clutching her red-headed sons, Ariel and Kafir, who were then aged 4 and 9 months, within a few hours circulated on social media after their abduction from kibbutz near Oz. The family, but particularly I think those 2 little boys with their red hair, became a symbol for Israel and the world of the true horrors of October the 7th. However, as the days and the weeks and the months passed, they became a symbol of hope, that one day we would see them return to Israel. Let me say, so great was the hope of the country that last Thursday, even after a few hours, that Hamas had said that they would return the bodies of Shira Bibas and her 2 children. Her sister-in-law, Ofri Bibas, said, "I ask you not to eulogize my family yet. We have been hoping for 16 months, and we will not give up hope now." But when last Thursday Hamas unveiled the black coffins on a podium under a rain-washed grey sky in southern Gaza with the photos of the two little Bibas children and their mother pinned to them on each of the caskets, that hope in Israel turned to grief. Hamas staged a ghoulish spectacle in which it paraded the coffins of the four Israelis as Gazan onlookers, including mothers and children, cheered, applauded and clapped wildly with exuberant joy. To add insult to injury, on Friday, the body returned was not that of Shira Bibas, the mother of the two boys, but an unknown Gazan woman. On Saturday, the autopsies revealed that Hamas had brutally murdered these two little boys with their hands. Decent people ask, how could they do such a thing? Who is capable of such monstrous barbarism? Decent people asked incredulously, how could they be so disrespectful to the dead? Decent people were stunned at the glee with which Hamas tormented the hostages they freed and those that they still hold. Yet after the atrocities of October the 7th, we saw the murder, the rape, the mutilation, the kidnapping, the burning of entire families. Should anybody still be surprised? And yet, time and time again, we are. And I believe this speaks more to our own decency. Our minds struggle to imagine such cruelty because it's not in our nature to behave this way, making it difficult for us to comprehend how others could be so inhumane and do such evil to other human beings. And what is perhaps even more shocking and disheartening is that this humanity has supporters in the media, in the rallies in major cities and elite universities around the world. One can only hope that the murder of these two innocent children in the name of this obscene ideology will open the eyes of some around the world to this reality that when these people cry from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. They are not calling for justice, but encouraging a baby-killing organisation to continue the slaughter of innocents. I want to conclude with a well-known Jewish custom to study a Mishnah in memory of loved ones that have passed on. A Mishnah is actually one of the earliest, first rabbinic Jewish texts. And I read to you a paragraph from a well-known text called Ethics of the Fathers, a text that extracts the ethical teachings of the sages. And here the Mishnah begins by saying, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel used to say, on three things does the world stand: on justice, on truth, and on peace. And he refers to the great verse in Zechariah when he says, execute the judgment of truth and peace in your gates. What Rabbi Gamliel is highlighting is an important principle. Societies are held together on three pillars: on justice, on truth, and on peace. Without one of them, a society crumbles. Unfortunately, we see this playing out before our very eyes. We live in times where there is no justice, where the common man cannot differentiate between what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is evil, what is light and what is dark. There is no truth. The lies have overtaken the conversation in the media, and in the absence of truth, there can never be a just peace. The Mishnah is not just a teaching, but it is a prayer and a hope that we may soon see a time when justice prevails, when truth triumphs, and only then will a true peace reign supreme. So I say truly to all of us, let us not remain silent, let us be emissaries of justice, champions of truth, and ambassadors of peace. Am Yisrael Chai. John.
Thank you, Rabbi. As usual, great story. And I think a couple of you may be posting some of the stuff that happened to the Bibas family and yeah, it just breaks our heart. One of our very good friends, who's part of the committee of SCAFI, Steve Lieblich, who lives in Perth, and we have people from, the west to the east, to the north, to the south, where I am, in the bottom of Tasmania, and our friends over in New Zealand. And Steve Lieblich is a great friend of the Jewish people and the Christian people, and who's living in Perth. And he invited one of our very good friends, our representative, Dave Sharma, who was the ex-ambassador to Israel from Australia, now a senator. So I'm going to ask Steve to introduce Dave Sharma to share with us. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you, John. Greetings from Perth to everybody. It's my honour and pleasure to introduce Dave Sharma, a very, very good friend of Israel. Dave has represented New South Wales in the Senate since December 2023, and he's a very active senator. I've got a list of all the Senate standing committees on which he serves. I won't read it out in the interest of brevity, but suffice it to say, he's an extremely active and effective senator, and we all owe him gratitude for that. He also represented the seat of Wentworth in the House of Representatives between 2019 and 2022. And before he entered politics, he was a career diplomat for Australia. And he served in Bougainville, Papua New Guinea, in Washington, D.C. And between 2013 and 2017, he served as Australia's ambassador to Israel. And that's when I first had the pleasure of meeting Dave. And I have to say, ever since then, Dave has drawn on his first-hand and intimate knowledge of Israel and the Middle East affairs to make very wise and informed and constructive contribution to the discussion of foreign affairs in the region, Australian foreign affairs in the region. So we are very, very grateful to have his wise counsel. Let me conclude by saying he also worked in national security roles in Canberra, and he's also worked in the private sector in assisting technology-oriented companies and as a company director and chairman. So we're very, very privileged to have Dave with us, and I invite Dave to take the floor.
Thank you so much, Steve, and good evening, everyone who's joined the call, and good evening to the Southern Cross Alliance for Israel. It's having a look at some of the photos of everyone who's on the call and hearing the locations before. It's great that you have such a diversely spread group of people who support Israel's cause and the cause of the Jewish community as well, because to state the obvious, and as the rabbi reflected in his opening remarks, this has been an incredibly difficult and challenging past 16 months for the state of Israel, but also for the Jewish diaspora worldwide, and especially so here in Australia. And I'll reflect a little bit on that this evening. But let me tell you a little bit about my personal story. I'm joining you, first of all, from Canberra, because an election has not been called. The Senate is still sitting in what's called estimates. So I've got senatorial duties in Canberra this week. But I came to know Israel, as Steve said, through my time as a career diplomat. I'm not Jewish. I should say that up front. I think about half of Australians, including a sizable portion of the Jewish community themselves, I think I must be Jewish, but I'm not. And I really only came to know Israel and through Israel, the Jewish community, during my time as an ambassador there from 2013 to 2017. And really my time there has informed my subsequent career choices since. I was there for 4 years. At the time, I was there with my wife. We're still happily married, I'm happy to say, and my 3 very young daughters. When we moved over there, I had a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a newborn, and they are now 18, 16, and 12. So some considerable time. It was 12 years ago I was first stationed there. But living there as a family gave me a tremendous appreciation, not only for Jewish values and culture, but also for the state of Israel and the remarkable reincarnation, if you like, of the state of Israel after 2,000 years of the Jewish people left homeless, stateless, wandering and suffering persecution. The recreation of the state of Israel in 1948 and the vision that preceded it, the vision of the Zionist people like Theodor Herzl, still has to count as one of the most remarkable and audacious feats of modern history, to create or recreate a state after 2,000 years of absence, to build a cohesive national entity, to turn what was really a liturgical language, Hebrew, into a national language, to build the institutions and apparatus of a state. But not only that, to do so in an incredibly hostile and adverse environment. Israel, when it was created, was surrounded by enemies and hostility that saw the state as an aberration and wished and sought to bring about its defeat and annihilation. And Israel was a very poor state. It was peopled by Jewish refugees by and large, who did not arrive with much. The land was not productive. At the time that Israel became independent, it was a poorer nation than Jordan or Egypt, for instance, and with considerably worse prospects because of the small territory, because of the hostile security environment, because of the lack of natural resources. But almost, what are we now, 87 years on from its, 77 years on from its creation, coming up to 80 years. What Israel has achieved since then to build a harmonious, democratic, pluralistic state, which has some of the most innovative and remarkable technology companies in the world, which is an OECD economy, which has high living standards, which has a generous social welfare system, which respects the rights of minorities, which has the rule of law, and to do so in an environment where every decade a country or a terrorist group seeks its annihilation is an admiration that can only be marvelled at, in my opinion. And my time in Israel, I think, gave me a sense, as it often does. You spend time abroad, you look back at your own country. My time in Israel gave me cause for worry about the direction of our own nation in Australia. It caused me to worry about our steady but inexorable unanchoring from our own values that underpinned our society, and a high degree of complacency that I saw creeping into Australia, an attitude that took our ongoing security, took our ongoing prosperity, and still does, for that matter, took it all for granted. And so when I returned from Israel in 2017, I'd been 17 years in the diplomatic service. I'd risen to the rank of ambassador. I wanted to make a bigger contribution, if you like, to Australia, and I wanted to be in a position where I could address some of the anxieties about the direction and fate of our own nation that had emerged during my time in Israel. And that is really, in a nutshell, why I put myself forward for political and public life and sought to serve Australia as an elected representative, sought to be in the parliament, sought to have an influence, or a more marked influence, if you like, on our national direction. And so, as Steve said, I was elected. I've had a few ups and downs in my political career, and it seems no political career is without those. I was first pre-selected to run in a by-election in 2018 in Wentworth, which is a seat in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. I narrowly lost that by-election. In 2019, I contested the same seat in the general election, and I won the election in 2019. And in 2022, I lost the seat again in what people call the teal wave. The seat of Wentworth was won by a teal candidate, not on first preference votes, but on the distribution of preferences from Labor and the Greens, by and large, the same business model they use across the nation. But a year and a half later, I contested a Senate vacancy caused by the resignation of Maurice Payne, and in December last year, I was appointed from New South Wales to fill that Senate vacancy, and so I'm now a senator for New South Wales. And look, I have, constituent responsibilities, policy responsibilities, committee responsibilities, but unsurprisingly, and it's probably how many of you have encountered me in public life, if you have, I remain an outspoken advocate for peace in the Middle East and for Israel's right to exist in peace and security in the Middle East, and for the Jewish people to continue to have a right to their homeland. And so I wanted to just reflect briefly now on what we have seen over the last 16 months, starting with the shocking and abominable terrorist attacks of the 7th of October 2023. When I was in Israel, I lived through the last major Israel-Hamas conflict, which was in the summer of the Northern Hemisphere summer of 2014. I became quite accustomed to hearing air raid sirens, checking an app on my phone for incoming rockets and where they were likely to land, evacuating my family to a bomb shelter. That conflict went on for some 100 days. It included continued and steady rocket fire from Hamas. And at the time, it was one of the worst conflicts that Israel had been involved in, at least in this century. But what we saw on the 7th of October, what I saw on the 7th of October, shocked me profoundly. Not only the loss of innocent civilian life, but the barbaric and inhumane way that life was taken. There's some 1,200 Israelis perished at the hands of Hamas terrorists in nearly without fail a gruesome and barbaric fashion and cruel fashion. And of course, they took some 250 hostages, a large number of which still remain in Gaza to this day, and which are steadily being released. And what has troubled me so much, I think, about the world's response and the public's response to that barbarism is how quickly people have forgotten how horrific those actions of the 7th of October are or were, and how quickly they have diminished or discounted or sought to avoid allocating moral responsibility for this conflict where it properly lies, which is at the hands of Hamas. I don't know how often we have heard from people calling for a ceasefire since this conflict broke out. But a ceasefire was in place on the 6th of October. On the 6th of October 2023, there was not a single Israeli occupying or in any part of Gaza. The Israeli Defense Force was not in Gaza. There were a few Israelis in Gaza who had been kidnapped, being held against their will and held hostage. But Gaza had self-government. They'd governed by a terrible, murderous terrorist organisation, Hamas, but they were governing themselves. They were free to organise their own lives and police themselves. Israel did not interfere with anything that was going on in Gaza, except to the extent that Gaza sought to harm Israeli citizens. And what happened on the 7th of October was Hamas invaded Israel with an unconventional armed force, admittedly, but they invaded Israel. They did as much damage as they possibly could, not only to the lives of those who were its victims, but to the sense of security and psychological safety of Israelis. They did so in a way that was horribly redolent of the worst traumas of Jewish history, including the Holocaust. Indeed, they caused the single loss of Jewish civilian life in a single day that we had seen since the Holocaust. And the world seems to have quite quickly forgotten that. It forgot it really within days, because within days of this onslaught, and before Israel had even had a chance to respond militarily, at a time when Israel was still counting its dead, treating its wounded, seeking to evict the last Hamas gunmen from its communities. We saw things like the Opera House protests in Sydney on the 9th of October, 2 days after Hamas's terrorist attack, which were effectively glorifying Hamas's terrorism and reveling in the loss of innocent civilian life. And we should never lose the clarity or the moral sense of judgment about who is right and who is wrong in this conflict, and who started this conflict, who retains responsibility for its continuation. As I've often said, this war would have been over very quickly if Hamas released all its hostages and surrendered its own leadership and laid down its weapons. But instead, Hamas has not only subjected Israel and Israeli civilians and its hostages to continued provocations, they've also subjected their own people, the people they're supposed to care about, the Palestinian civilian population of Gaza, to immense suffering that a war was always going to entail. I have been pleased, though, to see that Israel has, by and large, ignored the moral hypocrisy that has been emanating from student campuses and street demonstrations and Western capitals, and indeed some lawmakers, because you only survive in a region like the Middle East by being tough and uncompromising when it comes to your own security. And whilst Israel seeks to maintain and seeks to have indeed diplomatic friendly relations with all countries, Arab, Islamic, Christian, of all kinds, they would never and they should never sacrifice the lives of their own citizens or the security of their own state to pursue that. And I think, as we've seen the last 15 or 16 months play out, although it was prompted by a terrible atrocity, we have seen in many respects the best of Israel and Israeli society. We have seen them demonstrate a unity of purpose and a national unity in defeating their adversaries and recovering their hostages. But we've also seen them deal quite remarkably with some of the ongoing sources of instability and misery in the region. So if we look at what has changed in the Middle East over the last 15 or 16 months, we have seen Hamas significantly degraded, not yet defeated, but significantly degraded. We've seen Hezbollah, a terrorist organisation in the south of Lebanon, across Israel's northern border, decapitated. We've seen their leadership lost to Israeli attacks. We've seen their stranglehold over the state of Lebanon considerably weakened. And we've seen Iran, which in many respects is the puppet master behind these terrorist groups, which funds, arms, trains, equips, and provides ideological and material support to groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, humbled by Israel's willingness to take the fight to Iran. And almost as a byproduct of that, we have seen Syria liberated from the butcherous and murderous Assad regime, because Assad's rule had been propped up largely by Iran and Russia. And with both of those countries distracted and concerned about their own domestic situation, the Assad regime was quickly exposed to be effectively a paper tiger, a weak regime. And that gives me hope, not only for Israel, but for the region. Israel has transformed the security picture in the region. Iran is now more isolated and its proxies are less able to do damage. Syria, although we don't yet have a good sense about exactly what disposition the new Syrian regime will take, my initial read is it is at least better than the Assad regime, and I'm hopeful that will seek to create a modern, pluralistic and somewhat secular state. The jury is still out on that, but at least we are not seeing chemical weapons used against the Syrian civilian population, and we are not seeing torture dungeons like the Assad regime had. And we've also seen Israeli society united behind the cause of recovering the hostages and defeating Hamas. Yes, there are still political differences and political debates within Israel, and that is normal and to be expected in a liberal and democratic state. But what we have seen has shown a remarkable unity of purpose. What we've seen here in Australia, by contrast, has been a terrible abdication of moral leadership and clarity, and the tolerance or even encouragement of the erosion of some of our fundamental norms and values. The Jewish community here in Australia, in Sydney, in Melbourne, in Perth, in Brisbane, in Adelaide, across the country, has been subjected to a level of vilification and harassment that they have never experienced before in their time in Australia. And that has ranged from, hostility on the streets as expressed through protests wishing death or harm to Jewish people. It's been expressed through the doxing of Jewish individuals, the public outing of their private and personal details with a view to them being harassed. We have seen Israeli businesses boycotted, Israeli artists, or Jewish businesses boycotted, Jewish artists deplatformed. We have also seen Jewish homes vandalised. We have seen cars in Jewish neighbourhoods torched. We have seen graffiti put on Jewish schools and childcare centres. We have seen Jewish synagogues and other Jewish places of gathering firebombs. And how we have allowed it to happen and allow one minority community to be subjected to this, and in many respects have our government, federal and state, turn a blind eye to this, I find deeply troubling. What we have seen in Australia in the last 14 or 15 months, yes, it's a threat to the Jewish community, and yes, they have been terribly victimised and menaced and harassed. But the threat extends far beyond the Jewish community. It's a threat to us as a nation and our values. It's a threat to our ability to have people of different faiths and indeed no faith, different ethnicities, different political beliefs live alongside one another peacefully and harmoniously. And it's a threat to our values and our way of life. And that is why, from the 7th of October or the 9th of October, when this sort of anti-Semitism first reared its head, I have been so as forthright as I can be and as public as I can be in condemning this, because I saw very much where it was likely to lead and how much it was going to endanger us as a nation. Because, today or the last 12 or 15 months, it might be the Jewish community, but tomorrow or the next day, it could be any other community. And if we do not enforce our laws, if we do not say that people have a right to different political opinions over overseas conflicts without that being allowed to descend into violence or intimidation, then we do not have our country. We do not have Australia. And I think now, just looking ahead, most Australians intuitively understand this. If you see public polling on attitudes towards anti-Jewish activities or discrimination against Jews on the basis of race, they are overwhelmingly negative, but also a significant number of Australians see this as a threat not only to Jewish Australians but to our way of life and our values. And they are also, if you see public polling, highly dissatisfied with the government's weak response to this. And so I think, this will feature in a broad way in the upcoming election, because the fundamental duty of any federal government and state government, for that matter, the fundamental duty is to keep your citizens safe, to uphold the laws, to protect the lives and livelihoods and property and physical security of your citizens. And on this count, I don't think there's any doubt that the government, federal most particularly, but also state, has failed quite profoundly. And I think Australians are rightly very concerned about that, as they should be. We have seen in recent months an increase in police resourcing and activity to combat this, and I am glad that is the case. And we are seeing increasingly arrests made, task force established, investigations conducted, people charged. That is good and positive, but it has come far too late. And in many respects, the genie here has been let out of the bottle. We have allowed a climate of lawlessness and anarchy directed at our Jewish community to fester and gather momentum. And as a result, it's proving very difficult now to re-establish those norms and our laws, the observance of our laws. And I think that is what worries me so much. We need a government that is uncompromising in prioritising and putting first the security of Australians, and needs to be uncompromising in condemning any discrimination against people on the basis of their religion or faith, whether it's Jewish people or other people, because if we don't, we will quickly unravel as a pluralistic nation, as the pluralistic nation that we are. I would just leave you with one urge here, and I'm happy to take questions. I saw that pop up in the chat. Many Jewish, I don't know how many of you on the call are Jewish and how many are non-Jewish, but I know the Jewish community very well. I live amongst them in Sydney. They are some of my closest friends and colleagues. Jewish Australians have felt besieged and isolated and fearful these last 15 or 16 months. And I cannot tell you how much it means to them to know that other Australians, non-Jewish Australians who are not experiencing what they're experiencing, to know that they support them, to know that they disagree with what they are going through, to know that they are welcome as a part of Australia and we want them to remain part of Australia. So whatever you can do to extend that message, you know, whether it's going to speaking to your Jewish neighbours and friends, checking in on them, checking their welfare, supporting Jewish communal organisations, checking in with your rabbi, or helping out people in need. Your kindness and your solidarity at a time like this goes a very long way. So do what you can to reach out and support our Jewish community in Australia right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Wonderful to meet you on Zoom. Unfortunately, I've been intending to meet you many times, including trips to Israel, but we've never got around to it. So it's wonderful to have you with us. I just would like to say, you know, what can we do to support you in the forthcoming election? So if you want to put your website up and you know, we want the right people there as our political representatives. So we will do whatever it takes in order that you will be re-elected, because we know where your heart lies.
Thank you.
We thank you, and I look forward to meeting you. You touched upon something, the rise of lawlessness in this country is just remarkable. And, you know, even here in the south of Tasmania, I'm at the bottom tip of Tasmania in a place called Huonville, or just in the Huon Valley. The attack on the Jewish people is quite remarkable at council and in the street. And so I'm urging everybody to meet with their local police captain, or whatever they're called. I'm going to be meeting with the Tasmanian Police Commissioner to say, what are you going to do about this? So I just encourage people to support your local representatives in the political situation that stand for Israel, and to talk with your police about what's going on in your local city and town. So thank you. Anne, I know you want to ask a question, but I'm not going to allow you to ask a question until we get to the finish, and then I'll open up for questions. So it's great. Thank you, Dave. It's wonderful to have you with us, and we give you blessings, and we will support you in any way we can.
Thank you very much.
To move the meeting on, we've got a brief message before I introduce Stan Goodenough. A brief message from our good friend and one of the original committee members of SCAFI, Deon van Baalen, who now is living in the Judea, Samaria area, and has been for the last 3 to 4 years. And as we all know, it's a very controversial area at the moment with what is going on. So I'm going to ask Dave, can you please play that little video clip from Deon?
Yeah.
Good day. It is a privilege to join you from the mountains of Samaria in Israel on Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat is the New Year of Trees. It's a celebration of the birthday of trees every year, in a sense. It occurs on the 15th of Shvat on the Hebrew calendar or the Jewish calendar, and it is a date that has been set aside to determine the age of trees. According to the Torah, the fruit of trees can only be used after a certain number of years. And Tu B'Shvat is the date that has been set to determine the age of trees. This Tu B'Shvat, we were privileged to plant trees with the family of a soldier, an IDF soldier that died in Lebanon. And there was a group of men from America, from Canada, from Ireland, from Australia, from Switzerland that planted these trees here in Samaria, and it was a privilege to be able to bring some restoration back to the land. I'm standing here at the entrance of a cistern, an ancient cistern that has been carved out of the rock, and to get out of the wind so that you can hear me. But if I step out for a minute, you can see the beautiful Shomron behind me and the trees that we've planted in cages to protect them from gazelle and wildlife. So it was quite meaningful today to be planting trees and to be bringing life back to the land and to bring some restoration to the land of Israel. And that is a great joy to be able to plant trees here. In 2024 we planted almost 4,000 trees through the Greening Israel project. Since 2020 we've planted almost 20,000 trees through the Greening Israel project. If you have any questions or want to find out more, please go to greeningisrael.com or email me, Deon at HaYoval.com. Tu B'Shvat this year is a great celebration where we can celebrate another year, or the trees being 1 year old that we planted last year, and obviously the celebration of the birthday of the trees that was planted before that. May you have a blessed 2025 and blessings to you all from the Mount of Blessings, Mount Gerizim in Israel. Shalom.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Wonderful to see our good friend Deon, and he's there with his wife and his children in that Judea Samaria area. We hope to have a special guest to talk about what's happening in the Judea Samaria area in the next month. We've got a lineup of guests that are going to join us. It's wonderful. We've got 130 people tonight watching live, which is just incredible, and we just encourage you to join in with the conversation and for what we're putting out as SCAFI and indeed with the Israel Allies Foundation. And on that note, I'd like to introduce a very dear friend who has been walking with us, well, with me in particular, I don't know how many others, for the last 10 to 15 years, Stan Goodenough. Stan is not Israeli born, but he has lived there for 25 plus years, brought up his family there, was a tour guide there until COVID, and his heart for Israel is quite remarkable, as is his heart for Australia. And Stan has visited, 5 or 6 times in the last 10 years to come and share messages about Israel, and he's currently here in Australia visiting. I think this is his last 2 to 3 weeks, and Pam, you might want to put up the schedule of where he's going to be in the last couple of weeks. He's here to share a message that Hashem has put on his heart about why a 2-state solution will not work, and biblically and physically, I would go, yep, you're right on the ball, Stan, but we need to convince our friends and our political representatives as to why this can't happen. It's good to see Dave Sharma's going, right, I can see this can't happen. and we have to influence particularly our Liberal and National Party people and independent people as to why it can't. So, Stan, I just introduce you, 25 minutes, which is usually a 2-hour discussion. I will hopefully you will get a little bit of what you've got, and we will invite people to share by YouTube some of the other messages you've got to give the full explanation of Israel, the times, and why not a two-state solution. So over to you, Stan. All good.
I'm sitting in a small neighborhood down in the south of the country. And yes, I've been here for 3 weeks and I have another 3 weeks to go. It's really good to have a chance to share with everyone on SCAFI. It's good to see faces. Many of your friends I've gotten to know over the years. Sorry to just bump up the figures in my favor there, John, but this is my 8th visit to your country. And I've lived in Israel for 33 years and I have 7 children and 2 grandchildren who are Israel born there as well. It's also very special for me to see you, Senator Sharma. I don't know if you're going to be able to stick around, but actually you were right there at the start of my Australia awakening. And it was in Beersheba in 2014 when the mayor of Beersheba spoke to you and addressed you as ambassador and said, Mr. Ambassador, if it was not for Australia, there would be no Israel. And I remember being taken aback. By then I'd lived in Israel for more than 2 decades. I've been a journalist for quite a long time, and I've been a tour guide. And I'd gone through the tour guide training course, but the involvement of Australia, along with New Zealand and of course the British Empire, but the involvement of Australia had somehow missed me, or I had missed it. And it was very shortly after that first encounter, although it was a distant encounter, with Senator Sharma that I came down here for the first time. I subsequently met with Ambassador Sharma in the embassy in Tel Aviv when there was an effort underway and a push was being given towards the idea of moving the Australian embassy to Jerusalem. And there was so much hope at the time that perhaps as the centenary of the charge at Beersheba was approaching, that just maybe Australia could lead a charge once again, and this time in a different fashion, of course, and be the first nation to move its embassy back to Jerusalem. There were a couple of other embassies in the city at the time, but there was a prayer and a hope, and there was a lot of effort put into that by many Australians. It didn't happen, and that discussion, which we could have at a different time perhaps, is, I think, an ongoing hope and possibility in the hearts of many Aussies. I just want to make sure that everyone here knows that when I come to Australia to share my heart about Israel, and specifically the Australia-Israel connection, it is from a place of admiration for the history of your country. I would go so far as to say this. It might sound a little bit extreme, but I would go so far as to say that I have had a great deal of hope that in a world that has turned almost completely against Israel in ways that I will outline in a moment, that somehow Australia would stay in a different place. Well, let me go quickly into a bit of background, because that will actually lead into my story here. I moved to Israel in 1991 as a journalist of a newspaper in South Africa. I went to work for the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem. It was before the days of internet, and we had a paper publication there called the Middle East Intelligence Digest. And my first assignment in the 8 years that I would spend there was to go to Madrid and to cover the first big Middle East International Peace Conference that was convened by the senior George Bush, President of the United States. And I spent the 3 days in the press center there, as next door in the palace, the Arab nations slandered and attacked and assaulted Israel verbally from every angle. And then as Israel's prime minister, Yitzhak Shamir stood up and simply in response, without hitting back in any direction, told the story of the Jewish people. And he said, I want to tell you the story of my nation. And it didn't begin in 1948, but in 2000 BC with the calling out of Abraham. And he told her the whole history of his people. Back then already in the confines of that press center with thousands and thousands of journalists, it was the major news event at the end of that year after Desert Storm. I learned very quickly that the international media has a strong prejudice, a strong bias in support of the Palestinian Arabs and thereby of the creation of a Palestinian state, and equally strong negative prejudice against the Jewish people and their claim to the land and their history. And 30 plus years later, I've followed this. It's been my bread and butter in a sense, just following, covering, reporting on the Land for Peace process, as it is called, that many people think began in 1991. But in fact, the Oslo Agreement and later the Annapolis Conference, the Roadmap for Peace, and then, as it was coined by George W. Bush, the two-state solution is a story that begins in the same year as your light horse charge, Beersheba. Palestinian nationalism began way back then. Its purpose was to prevent Jewish immigration, and it was born in violence, and it grew stronger in violence against Jewish immigration, against Jewish settlement, and even against the British mandate's effort to bring about the realization of the Balfour Declaration, which of course is what the mandate was for. Going on from there, the grandfather of Palestinian nationalism would become an ally with Adolf Hitler and would go to Berlin and encourage the Nazi leader to come and cleanse what was called Palestine from the Jewish presence, and even offered some of his Palestinian Arab footmen to go and serve as Sonderkommando in Europe and to be part of the effort to annihilate Europe's Jews. So this is the thinking and the direction out of which was birthed the Palestinian national movement. It wasn't called Palestinian nationalism back then. It would go on after Israel's creation, which it failed to prevent, and that was its purpose. It would morph into the umbrella organization and direction of Palestinian nationalism, which was carried by the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. And in a very short sketch of the history of the years from 1964 until today, the PLO, in order to gain international attention, to draw international attention to the plight of the Palestinian Arabs, the refugees, and all of that, used violence, hijackings, the murder of Israeli Olympic athletes in 1972, the assassination or attempted assassination of Israeli diplomats, the blowing up of restaurants attended by Jews, frequented by Jews in Paris and in London. Violence that spanned more than a decade and that caught the world's attention, and that would eventually bring about the first major accomplishment, if you like, of the PLO, when its leader, Yasser Arafat, was invited to the General Assembly of the United Nations and made the case for his people before the world. And that violent history would continue on through the 1970s and into the 1980s. In its original format, with the drafting of the PLO Charter or its manifesto, it stated that there was only one way to eradicate Israel. It exists to eradicate Israel, not to live alongside Israel, but to eradicate Israel. In fact, the idea of two-state solutions had begun already in the mandate period, when 3 such proposals were put forward by the British to the Jews and Arabs in the land to divide the land between the two peoples, and they were universally and uniformly rejected by the Arab side, even though they were accepted by the Jewish side. So the whole idea of dividing the land and sharing the land, which in the minds of people perhaps who don't know the history or who are not aware of the driving ambition of the Islamic faith with regard to the land, is long-standing. It's been unfolding for a very long time. It was birthed in violence, and it has been perpetuated in violence, and all the way up until October the 7th, when I was in Jerusalem. I had dropped off a group of Australian tourists the day before who just finished their tour, and I was in the city as the horrors began to unfold, and experienced, along with the people of Israel, something that is, I think, possibly unprecedented or unparalleled in modern history, and that is the traumatization of an entire nation that has had to bury its dead, count its dead, try to digest the barbarity and what has actually happened, and of course the ongoing torment of the families of the hostages that has dragged on for such a long time. But it was just a few weeks after the massacre, in fact, in January in 2024, that one of the leaders of the Hamas movement, Khaled Mashal, speaking on Arabic language television, told his interlocutor, you see, it works for us. The more violence we perpetrate against the Jews, the worse our atrocities, the more support we get out in the world for our cause, not for a two-state solution, but for a one-state solution from the river to the sea. It works for us. And he's absolutely right. History all attests to that fact. History, modern history, and the history of my short life in Israel attests to this fact. First of all, that Palestine, as a state, as a nation state, has no historical legitimacy and doesn't exist as an actual state. It is an idea, which, even though it's been recognized by more than 158 members of the United Nations, is still a non-entity. And its purpose from the inception of the movement and from the charter of the PLO is to replace Israel, to destroy Israel. Palestine is a weapon. That's in the mind of the Palestinian Arab leadership, the consecutive leaders, whether they've been in the PLO's Fatah movement, which is the largest of the groups, or whether under the same umbrella of the PLO, it has been the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or the other many versions of the Palestinian liberation movements, including, by the way, in 1977, Hamas, that was at the Palestine National Council, which met in Cairo and determined to change the charter in the following direction, and to say that we can't destroy Israel by force, so we will negotiate with Israel, and we'll sit and we will get as much land as we can through negotiations, through land for peace. And then when we can get no more land, we will use what we have to drive the Jews into the sea and to establish our state from the river to the sea. And that plan, the 10-point plan of the Palestine National Council, known by the Israelis as the phased plan for the destruction of Israel, is still in place. My eyewitness accounts, my experience in Israel has left me with the solid conviction that although Iran is identified as the greatest threat to Israel, and in terms of its pursuit of nuclear weapons, it is on the face of it the greatest threat, also with its proxy armies, which, as Senator Sharma so accurately said, have been given a real hiding by Israel. We're currently at a ceasefire point. How are things going to go in the next few weeks? Nobody knows. But all along, as Iran has been growing and stretching out its tentacles and becoming a more and more visible threat, behind the scenes has been this insidious danger that has been growing, the inexorable march towards the establishment of a state of Palestine. And the two-state solution, as it was put forward by George W. Bush, by the time he put that forward, Israel had already offered, just 2 years previously at Camp David, all of the land that the Palestinian Arabs were calling for. Gaza, 98% of Judea and Samaria, half of Jerusalem, including Israel's most sacred treasures, the tombs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in Hebron, and the mountain of the Lord, the Temple Mount. It was all on the table by Ehud Barak, the Prime Minister of Israel, offered to Yasser Arafat in front of Bill Clinton. The whole world knows that Israel has been willing to bend over backwards, and more than bend over backwards, to take all kinds of risks for peace. But in reality, all of that has led to October the 7th, and October the 7th awoke the people of Israel to the fact, those who still held on to the hope in a two-state solution, awoke them to the fact that there is no two-state solution. And now Israel is solidly certain of that fact. There is no way to peace down this road. They have tried. They have bled and died trying. They have been slaughtered as they have exposed themselves to the dangers of an enemy that is implacable, that is driven by its Islamic faith, because it is mainstream Islamism. It's not extremist Islamism. It's mainstream Islam that teaches from the Quran that the Jews will ultimately be vanquished by those who worship Allah. And so the people of Israel know, and any hope that maybe down the two-state solution road there was some possible peaceful outcome has gone. It's been expressed not only on the in the public square, it's been expressed in the Knesset, in the plenum. Twice last year, votes on a resolution and on a statement were received a majority positive vote in support of rejection of the idea of any Palestinian state west of the Jordan River, and rejection of the idea of the two-state solution. So Israel now is in a place where there is no more support for the two-state solution. But look what's happened on the other side. Australia, and please hear my heart again, Australia, which when I first came here in 2014, part of the outcome of that visit was, and I speak very, and I hope you hear me on this. I understand that I'm an outsider here. Okay, I don't have any desire to interfere or put my nose where it doesn't belong. But I grew to admire and love this country for what it had done. It was really a midwife that helped bring about the rebirth of the nation state of Israel. Australia was right there at the charges and at Tobruk and Al Alamein. Australia was right there, and Australians gave their lives. And the outcome of all of that, one of the outcomes of all of that was that Israel was able to come back into existence. So when I speak to Aussies, it really comes from a place of look at your history. It's amazing, your history. Israelis know your history, and they have loved Australia, and they stand and salute your Akubra hat, in the marches in Jerusalem every year, tabernacles. But they've seen Australia move increasingly away, and here's the tragic and really difficult conundrum that suddenly Israel finds itself in. After it has come to recognize the futility of the two-state solution, and not just the futility, but that it actually poses an existential threat to Israel. After they've come to that realization, nation after nation has stood up and said, no, there is no other way forward. It's only to the two-state solution. Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, was running around early last year, trying to lay the groundwork, according to a Washington Post article, trying to lay the groundwork for irreversible locking in of the diplomatic process via the two-state solution to a diplomatic end to the conflict here. And in his final speech as Secretary of State, he laid out the plan. Now he's not the administration of Joe Biden is no longer there, but the plan that Blinken said he would hand over to the Trump administration included, among other things, a coercing element that would force Israel to go down the road of a two-state solution by pulling Jews out of Judea and Samaria and handing that land over to the Palestinian nationalist movement, including, by the way, the half of Jerusalem that they want. So now Israel stands alone against the world, and is looking around for someone who will, take a side based on historical truth. They're not looking for necessarily people of faith. First and foremost, they're looking in the political arena, but of course the Christian world understands that the Jewish people are the only people who have an aboriginal rooting in that land, and that the other side has no claim historical to national possession there. But they stand there and they are watching the move now towards what on June the 2nd of this year will be a special conference at the United Nations, and its purpose, it'll run for 3 days, and its purpose is, in the words of the coordinators of this conference, is to set in stone the two-state solution as the only way forward. Now, Donald Trump, coming to the presidency, has created a small space, actually quite a big space. He's caused an enormous amount he's done a lot of upsetting of all kinds of locked-in thinking, not least concerning, first of all, Gaza, and then by extension, almost certainly, into the whole two-state solution paradigm. And whether or not what his position is ultimately going to be, we are not sure. But his new ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, has said the two-state solution is dead. Australians, you now have an election coming up. I have on my lap, which I cannot read here in the dark, I'm sorry to say. Actually, put that lamp on for me, please. A week before I came to Israel, I went to the Knesset and I spoke with a member of Knesset. His name is Ohad Tal. And I explained to him that from what I knew from my visit here 10 months ago, that all the major parties in Australia support the two-state solution. And I had heard from Andrew Wallace, MP, and a number of other members of Parliament last March that so the Liberal Party itself supports the two-state solution. And my understanding is that the reason that support exists is because up until recently in Israel there was support for the two-state solution. So the premise of the Liberal Party support is we support the two-state solution as worked out by the parties to the conflict, which is reasonable in and of itself, a position to take. But now the Israelis are not supportive of the two-state solution. And in our discussions with Ohad Tal and some of his staff, there was a wondering whether if Australia's parliamentarians, those who stand with Israel, those who recognize and are dismayed by and angered even by the drift or the political drift of Australia away from Israel, that perhaps if word could be got to the MPs in the coalition, your lawmakers, that there is no longer support for it there. So why does Australia or the potentially incoming new government, why does it need to stand on the idea of a two-state solution, which Israel now believes and knows to be an existential threat? And so, in short order, a letter was drafted by Ohad Tal. It was signed by 8 members of 8 different parties, MPs from 8 different parties in the Knesset. I will just read it to you. I know we're out of time, but I'll just read to you directly. It's addressed to Andrew Wallace, MP, and the honourable members of the Australia-Israel Allies Caucus. We, members of Knesset from a range of parties, wish to congratulate you on the establishment of the Australia-Israel Allies Caucus. We welcome the relaunch of this caucus and believe that it will enhance the long-standing friendship between Australia and Israel. We are concerned about the recent attempts to derail the relations between our countries, and we are worried, like many in Australia too, about the rising wave of anti-Semitic attacks against the local Jewish community. Along with cracking down hard on anti-Semitism, a policy change that could benefit our nations would be the withdrawal of the commitment to the so-called two-state solution. While Australia's main political parties formally continue to endorse two states, Israel's political representatives and public have long opposed such a plan, especially since the October 7th massacre. It is clear, and he has this in bold, it is clear that the creation of a Palestinian state would mean the destruction of the state of Israel. This understanding was reflected in a high-profile vote in the Knesset plenum in July 2024, a resolution passed by 68-9, stating that the Knesset firmly opposes the establishment of a Palestinian state west of the Jordan. Rather than pursuing tried and failed policies, we urge the nations of the world to explore alternatives that could actually ensure the security and stability of the region. The consequences of October the 7th must include the deletion of the two-state option, rather than rewarding the savages who committed the massacre. A Palestinian state would serve the sole defining anti-Semitic goal of Palestinian nationalism, which is the eradication of the Jewish state. Ahead of the federal elections in Australia, we call on the various political parties to remove the two-state paradigm from their party platforms. Such a move would send a strong message of support and friendship to Israel and to Jewish Australians. It would also express a commitment to common sense, justice, and peace in Israel and the region. Signed. That letter was handed to Mr. Wallace and to, I believe, as many as 35 of the members of the caucus. What has been communicated, certainly to me since then, is that to make this change in the platform before the elections is almost an impossibility. And so that's what is before you Aussies right now in terms of how what Israel is looking for, as it puts hope once again in an Australia that has a 100+ year legacy of being a blessing to Israel, of helping to bring about the rebirth of Israel, of staving off the Nazi threat to the Jews in Palestine so that Israel could be born, and opening up its arms. This country, you have welcomed in more Holocaust survivors per capita than any other English-speaking country, and they have been safe and secure here. At least they were until October the 7th. So that's part of the message that I'm sharing, and thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight, and hand it back to you there.
Thank you, Stan. Wonderful. Pam, you might want to put up some links to some YouTube of Stan's full message and the history that takes place. So, and we're happy to send that out to you. The letter I've got a copy of, and I'm encouraging you, each one of you, to go to your local member that's going to be standing in the election and say, here is the position of Israel of what they're saying about a two-state solution. And I'm encouraging all of our Liberal National Party people to say a two-state solution is possibly one answer, but there are many other answers that are coming forward right at the moment as to how we can help and support our friends and neighbours from all directions. So that even that little slight change of direction with the Liberal MP and independents would make a huge difference. So we're encouraging the Israel Allies Caucus to take that step. So we're working with that. To answer your question on the Israel Allies Foundation is working hand in hand with NAIM, with Mark Leach and with Dave Pello and with the ACL, in by way of, we all come from different directions. NAN is forming chapters throughout Australia of individuals from different churches to join them in standing for Israel and the Aussie Judeo-Christian values and ethics. ACL is coming from its own direction as where it stands as a Christian leaders organisation. And the Israel Allies Foundation are coming from both the Jewish and Christian perspective to say we stand together, and in particular we support the politicians who recognise Israel and its calling, and we will support those and their electorates by educating, helping them in their journey. So it's a threefold aspect of how we work together. And let me just assure everybody, and next month I'll give you details, bank accounts and things like that as to how we can do this and its purpose. But at this stage, we've come to the end of the night, and I'd just like, as always, to invite the Rabbi to share the final message.
It's certainly been an amazing night with such two eloquent and passionate speakers for Israel. So Stan, thank you so much for your love and your passion, and for Israel, and particularly for coming here to Australia. I just want to touch on what Dave Sharma had said, that really how important it is to reach out to Jewish people and to congregations. And just speaking from personal experience, two things have happened here. That number one, the St Andrew's Church and community in Brighton have put in their billboard that anti-Semitism is wrong and let the Jews of Australia live in peace. but perhaps more importantly, over this last few weeks and months, we've met with them together with 10 vicars in this area, in the Caulfield-Brighton area. And this Friday, this Shabbat Eve, we are inviting, they're coming to join our Friday night service. And then we will be sharing a traditional Shabbat meal with their congregation. It's unfortunate the actual meals are only limited to 120 because of the size of the hall, but the response has been truly overwhelming. And I think this is important. I think you should reach out to Jewish friends and neighbours. I think you should reach out to a synagogue in the area. If you're welcome to reach out to me as well. But in essence, you're raising your voice and you're not remaining silent. And that is so important, because evil flourishes when good people are silent. And we must never remain silent as to what is happening in Australia today. John.
Thank you, Rabbi. We are all in the position now to go to our local members, to talk with them, and I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to be a part of your local Jewish community. I encourage you to be a part of what SCAFI and Israel Allies Foundation and the caucus are doing. And if you're not a member of that, please email us and we'll add you to the database. It's an exciting time. It's a challenging time. And as I say to everybody, because they ask me, what's the answer? And my answer to that question is, but for God, but for Hashem. We don't know the answer. So we have to seek him, stand with him, stand with our allies, our Jewish, Christian, Judea heritage and values, and he will bless us as he always does. So I just want to say thank you to everybody tonight. Please unmute and just give a round of applause to Dave Sharma and Stan Goodenough and all that we are doing, and say good night.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
That was excellent.
Thank you so much.
God bless you. God bless you.
Shalom.
Thank you.
Shalom. So much. Shalom. Shalom.
Appreciate it.
Shalom.
Bless you.